My father threw me out of the house at 11 o'clock at night in the middle of January. No coat, no explanation, no chance to say a single word. He opened the front door, looked at me like I was a stranger, like I was something he'd never seen before in his life, and said, "Get out, and don't you ever come back." The door slammed so hard the window next to it rattled. I stood on the front porch in my socks. Just my socks. The concrete was frozen. The air cut straight through my shirt like it had a reason to. And I remember standing there thinking, this isn't happening. This is not my life. Because my father and I weren't just close. We were each other's entire world. After my mom passed when I was 9 years old, it was just the two of us against everything. He coached my Little League games. He stayed up with me through the nightmares. He drove 4 hours every single month just to watch me play college football. We were the kind of father and son that strangers noticed. You two, you can just tell. People said it all the time. And then it was over, in less than 30 seconds, over something that never happened. To understand that night, you have to go back about 8 months earlier. My dad called me one afternoon in the spring, and his voice had something in it I hadn't heard in a long time, something lighter. He told me her name was Diana. He said she was warm, funny, sharp. He laughed twice in a 5-minute phone call. I was genuinely happy for him. He'd been alone for years. He deserved this. Then I met her. Diana was 34. My father was 58. I wasn't going to make that a thing. I told myself it wasn't a thing. But when I sat across from her at that first dinner and she smiled at me, this slow, deliberate, too knowing smile, something in my stomach shifted. She was almost engineered to be perfect. She said the right things at the right times. She laughed exactly when you'd want someone to laugh. She looked at my father like he was the most interesting man in any room she'd ever walked into. My brain kept trying to name what felt wrong about it. It wasn't attraction. It wasn't coldness. It was more like watching someone give a performance so polished that you keep waiting for a line they haven't rehearsed yet. But I told myself I was being overprotective. Jealous, maybe. I smiled, shook her hand, and decided to give her a real chance. They got married 4 months later. I was the best man. I stood up there next to my dad with a smile on my face, and I buried that feeling so deep, I almost stopped feeling it. Almost. After the wedding, Diana moved in, and the subtle wrongness I couldn't name started coming into focus. It wasn't anything dramatic at first. It was small. It was the kind of thing that sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud. Like the way she'd touch my arm when she was talking to me. Just a second or two too long. And then she'd look up and hold eye contact, and I'd feel myself look away first, and I never understood why. Or the comments. One afternoon I came over to help my dad with some yard work. Diana came outside with water, looked at me for a moment, and said, "You know, you have your father's eyes, but a completely different energy." She said it quietly, almost to herself. Then she turned and walked back inside. I stood there holding a rake, not knowing what to do with that sentence. There were texts, too. Started a few months in. Nothing explicit. Nothing you could screenshot and show someone. Just messages that arrived too late at night. "Hey, are you still awake? Was thinking about that thing you said at dinner." Or once, just once, a message that said, "Your father doesn't appreciate how much you notice things. I've always thought that." I didn't respond to that one. I told myself she was probably just lonely. Probably adjusting to the marriage. I was building something out of nothing. Then there was the money situation. My father had spent 30 years building a small construction company from nothing. After Diana came in, he started restructuring everything. New accounts, shifted assets, updated legal arrangements. She was in the middle of all of it. I sat down with him one evening and tried to bring it up carefully. He shut me down before I got through 2 sentences. "She's my wife," he said. "She's family. That's what family does." The way he said it, that gentle, firm, completely closed door, I recognized it. That was the voice he used when a conversation was finished. So I dropped it. But the feeling didn't drop. If anything, over the next few weeks, it got heavier. Like standing in a room and slowly becoming aware of a smell you can't identify. You don't know if it's dangerous. You don't know if you're imagining it, but you can't stop noticing it. It was a Thursday, January, one of those nights that's so cold the air feels thin. My dad was supposed to be away at a work conference, 2 nights out of town. I'd come by to drop off some tools I'd borrowed a few weeks earlier. Diana had said I could leave them in the garage. She'd let me in. Simple. 10 minutes, maximum. She opened the front door and she was in a robe. She said she wasn't feeling well. Said she'd been in bed most of the day. She did look pale, genuinely pale. She held the door open and said, "Come in for a few minutes. I'll get you coffee." I should have said no. I know that now with every part of me. I should have said, "I'll just leave the tools on the porch," and walked back to my car. But it felt unkind. She looked unwell. She looked alone. So I came in. She closed the front door behind me. We sat at the kitchen table. She poured 2 cups of coffee. We talked. Normal conversation, nothing strange, nothing that would have meant anything to anyone watching. I asked if she needed me to call my dad. She shook her head and said she didn't want to worry him. About 20 minutes in, she leaned across the table to refill my cup. And she stopped. She stayed leaned forward for just a second longer than she needed to, looked at me from a distance of about 2 feet, and said, almost softly, "You're a good person. You know that?" I leaned back in my chair and opened my mouth to say something, and then headlights swept across the kitchen window. I didn't recognize them immediately. By the time my brain caught up, I heard the front door, the same front door she had locked behind us. I heard it unlock. My father's footsteps in the hallway. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, and here's what he saw. His wife, in her robe, leaning across the kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night. His son sitting across from her in her home, in the dark, with no lights on except the one above the stove. I opened my mouth. Diana straightened up slowly. She set down the coffee pot. She turned to look at my father. And her face. I will never stop seeing her face in that moment for as long as I live. Crumpled. She didn't say anything. She didn't accuse me of a single thing. She just put both hands over her mouth and her shoulders started to shake. The silence in that kitchen lasted maybe 4 seconds. It felt like falling. My father looked at her. Then he looked at me, and I watched his face do something I had never seen a human face do before. I watched it close, like a window slamming shut, like something behind his eyes went very quiet and very cold and very far away. "Dad?" He turned and walked to the front door. I followed him, talking. I don't even remember what I was saying. Just words, desperate words, filling the air because I couldn't stop and let the silence confirm something that wasn't true. He opened the door. "Get out," he said. "And don't you ever come back." I turned back toward the kitchen. Diana was standing in the hallway now. Her cheeks were wet. She looked at me over my father's shoulder and said nothing. Her eyes were completely dry. The cold hit me the moment that door shut. January and nothing but a shirt and socks, standing on a frozen porch at 11 p.m., and the only thought I could hold on to was, he didn't let me finish a sentence. I called him from my car, sitting in his driveway, straight to voicemail. I drove home in a kind of shock that doesn't have a name. Not quite grief, not quite panic, something underneath both of those. The specific feeling of a world reorganizing itself into a shape you don't recognize. I tried everything in those first few weeks. I called until he changed his number. I wrote letters, real ones, handwritten, multiple pages, and they came back unopened. I drove to the house once, about 3 weeks later. Diana opened the door. She looked at me for a long moment with that same quiet, measuring expression I'd seen so many times before. "He doesn't want to see you," she said. "Please don't come back." No anger, no discomfort, just clean, flat certainty. She closed the door. I stood on that porch for a minute before I walked back to my car. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel and thought about her eyes that night in the hallway, how wet her face was, how dry her eyes were. I filed that away somewhere I couldn't fully reach. Family members tried to intervene, a couple of them. My aunt called him on my behalf and told me afterward that he'd said he would never forgive me, that what I'd done was the worst betrayal a son could commit against a father. I stopped eating properly, stopped sleeping right, went through the mechanics of my life, work, groceries, bills, repeat, but I was operating from somewhere hollow. Year 1 passed, then 3, then 7. I moved to a different city, built a different version of myself around the space he used to occupy. I stopped reaching out around year 4. Not because I gave up loving him, but because hope, when it receives no answer for long enough, starts to become its own kind of injury. Then 11 years after that night in January, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. It was a Tuesday morning. I was standing in my kitchen making coffee, and I almost let it go to voicemail. I picked up. "It's your father." My legs went out. I didn't decide to sit down. I was just suddenly on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet, holding the phone with both hands. His voice was older, rougher around the edges. But underneath all of that, underneath 11 years of silence and distance and whatever his life had become, I could still hear him, the same him, and it broke something open in my chest that I had spent a very long time sealing shut. He said, "I need to tell you some things, and I need you to let me finish before you say anything." I told him I was listening. What came out over the next hour didn't just change how I understood that night. It changed how I understood everything. He started slowly, like a man walking very carefully across ice he already knew was cracked. He told me Diana had left him 2 years ago, that she had walked out and taken a significant portion of his assets through legal structures that had been built, he now understood, with that exact exit in mind from the very beginning. He'd started therapy after she left, started untangling what the last decade had actually been. And then, 8 months before he called me, he'd received a letter from Diana. He said she wrote that she needed him to know the truth, that she had something to say and she needed to say it, regardless of what he did with it. She wrote that nothing ever happened between his son and her. Not that night, not ever. She had planned the entire thing. She knew what time he was arriving home. She had canceled the conference herself. By that point, she had full access to his email and calendar. She had texted me deliberately to come over. She had made sure the lighting in the house was wrong. She had gotten into her robe, and when she saw his headlights cross the window, she had already started crying. The picture was built before he ever walked through the door. My father went silent on the phone for a long time. When he came back, his voice was a different kind of quiet, the kind that lives just on the other side of something shattering. "I've had 8 months to figure out how to call you," he said, "and I almost didn't. Because the moment you heard this, you would know exactly what kind of man looked at his own son and chose to believe the worst." I didn't say anything. He kept going. Diana's letter didn't just confess to the setup, it explained why. My father, in his late 20s, early in his career, had been a junior partner in a small property development firm. A deal collapsed. It wasn't purely his fault. There were multiple people involved, and bad luck played its part. But a family lost their home, lost their savings, lost years of their lives rebuilding. My father knew. He walked away. He told himself it was just business. The family's name was Vasquez. Diana's maiden name was Vasquez. She had found him online roughly 3 years before she walked into his life. She had researched everything: his company, his assets, his routines, his relationships, his son. The warmth, the laugh, the measuring looks she thought I hadn't noticed, the late-night texts, the slow infiltration of his finances. All of it mapped out before she ever introduced herself. She had married him to dismantle what he'd built, and she had destroyed his relationship with his son. She wrote this herself, in her own words, which my father could barely read aloud, because she wanted him to experience what it felt like to lose someone he loved and be completely unable to get them back. Like her father had lost everything and never fully recovered. My father's voice broke completely when he got to that part. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She wasn't wrong about what I did back then. I wasn't the only one, but I was part of it. And I walked away when I could have done something. I've lived with that. Then, but I should have looked at my own son and listened. Whatever I did 30 years ago, you had nothing to do with it. And I chose to believe a lie because it was easier than asking you the question." I didn't cry on that phone call. I could feel it, right there, sitting heavy in the center of my chest, but I couldn't get to it. Not yet. I just sat on that kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet and listened to my father breathe on the other end of the line. He didn't ask me to forgive him that day. I think he understood that forgiveness isn't something you can request on a phone call after 11 years. He just said he needed me to know the truth, and he needed me to know that there had not been a single day in those 11 years when he hadn't thought about me. I believed him. I'm not sure that made it easier, not right away, because here's the thing no one talks about when a long silence finally breaks. The truth doesn't automatically undo the years. The nights I spent wondering what I did wrong, the milestones he missed, the version of myself that had to grow up without a father not because he died, but because he chose to stop looking. Those things didn't disappear when I heard the truth. But here's what happened over the following months. I started remembering a 9-year-old boy who lost his mother, and the man who stayed up all night through the bad dreams, who drove 4 hours just to sit in the bleachers and watch him play, who loved completely and without much armor between the love and the world. Diana had understood something about my father that I had never fully named. His love wasn't a weakness, but it was a door. And if you understood exactly how he was wired, how completely he committed, how deeply he trusted, how absolutely he could believe in something once it was inside his walls, you could walk through that door and lock it behind you before he even noticed you were inside. She hadn't just deceived him. She had studied him first. She was smarter than both of us. My father and I have spoken almost every week since that phone call. It's different now, quieter in some ways, more careful in others. There's a weight to our conversations that wasn't there before. Not bad exactly, just honest. Like two people who know what they almost permanently lost. It's not the same as before. I think we both know it never will be. You can heal a broken thing and still feel where the break was. That's just the truth of it. But we're here. And some evenings, when he says something that sounds exactly like the man who used to sit on the edge of my bed and tell me everything was going to be okay, I think, maybe crooked and healed is still something worth holding on to. Maybe that's enough. I never looked for Diana. I don't know where she is or what her life looks like now. I've made my peace with not knowing. But I think about her sometimes. About the years she spent sharpening that grief into something precise. About what it actually costs a person to build their entire life around making someone else feel a loss. I wonder if she found what she was looking for. I don't think she did. And I think, somewhere in whatever quiet she's living in now, she knows that too. Some people walk into your life already knowing exactly how to destroy it. The terrifying part isn't that they exist, it's how long it can take to find out they were there.